Welcome to Rick on Life, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. I'm Rick Amitin, and I love to talk about things that impact our lives. And today we're going to be talking about life, writing, and how to create change with Bibiana Krall. Bibiana is a best-selling author of the suspense novel Escape into the Blue, and proud to be part of her first Hive writing experiment, Gender in Fiction, a collaborative study. Also, author of 4 published novels, a slew of literary short stories. She's a regular contributor to Millionaire Digest and Read My Mind magazine, and a former international travel expert and luxury insider. Bibiana Krall has lived the adventurous life she writes about in her novels, highlighting strong female protagonists and character-driven stories utilizing social narratives. She is winner of a Pay It Forward scholarship from Wilkes University, CW. Bibiana Krall has been called a lyrical maven and a literary wordsmith. It's a pleasure to have you. Welcome, Bibiana.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about being here.
Well, look, you already have about 12 titles out, but tell us a little bit about yourself. I've read that you come originally out of Michigan,
Yes.
and I grew up in northern Indiana, just 40 miles south of Chicago. So I'm familiar with that Great Lakes weather, and I think I got thawed out about a year or so ago. I left there in '74, and I think I got thawed out. But tell us a little bit about where you came from.
Well, I was raised on a farm, and apparently my mother especially was a really forward thinker, because we grew up organically with whole foods, and we belonged to a food co-op. We did a lot of, we raised all kinds of animals and did that sort of thing. It wasn't a huge farm. It was more like what I call a gentleman farm. It fed our family, and anything that was extra got traded with the neighbors down the road or in town for piano lessons, for all kinds of things. So I didn't realize that the whole world didn't live this way until I moved away from home. But now when I look at people running to Whole Foods and saying, oh, you can't eat that because it has this chemical in it, it makes me laugh, because I was raised that way, and I had no idea that it was forward thinking. I thought it was, honestly, as a kid, I thought it was annoying. I wanted to eat things that had packages and price tags on it. I didn't want to have to go pick the rhubarb. I wanted to buy it from the store. So, but I'm very grateful for that, because the hard work, the 4:30 in the morning feeding of the animals in waist-deep snow, teaches you to appreciate when life isn't quite as physically challenging. So, and
Right.
It definitely isn't these days.
When did you decide to begin actively writing, and from that point, what have you learned so far?
Well, I started actively writing. It'll be 3 years this October 31st, which is like the weirdest day in the world to have it be your day of reckoning, I guess. But it'll be 3 years. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had an experience, something that I really can't explain. I was driving with my family in South Carolina to a place that I go all the time. I absolutely love this island that we go to, called Hunting. And it pretty much got destroyed in Irma. It was destroyed in Matthew, and then it was destroyed again in Irma, so who knows. But anyway, as we were driving and drinking frozen Cokes going out to the beach, I heard a voice, and the voice said, do you want to see? Do you want to come with me? And I'm like, say what? What's on the radio? What is this? And my family completely ignored me. At that point, we were in beach mode. We were like, what are we going to have for dinner? And so I closed my eyes and just let it take me. And where it took me was, I'll show you this. This is so amazing. I have a pile of books for reading next week. Caroline Spirit was my absolute first book that I wrote. And it was written from the influence of this voice that I heard of a young woman named Gracie. And she wanted to tell her story. Well, oddly enough, I told my family. They laughed at me and they were like, all right, you're crazy. Let's just go climb on some stuff at the beach. So I dropped it. But 3 days later, Gracie came to me in a dream, the same girl. And she said, are you going to do it? Well, I knew what are you going to do it meant. What it meant was, are you going to tell people my story? So the entire first chapter is what Gracie showed me. It's what she showed me in my dream. It's what she showed me when she said, you want to come see? So, I think it was a collective thing that I had always wanted to write, always wanted to do it, but didn't feel like I had the authority to write. Like, what do you think you're doing? Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. So I think a lot of writers struggle with that. They think, this is my story and I might tell my best friend, but you got a lot of guts to write it down and actually say to other people, this is worth reading. So there's a struggle with that. And that's what really got me writing. That's really what got me writing.
Well, since you got started, you're well trained now. You're well down the road. You have a number of titles out there. So what moves you? What storyline captures you?
So for me, a story has to have some pretty strong elements to really hold me, because I read almost a book a day, because I'm a full-time grad student too, so I read constantly. And for me, the most important thing for a story is to have a character. It has to have a character that people connect to. I have taken upon myself to make my lead character always a female. Why? Because literary world has been inundated with male characters for years and years and years. And women have strong voices and females have a place in society as that strong character to look up to. And so I've decided that that's always spearheaded my writing, because Gracie started it, this strong young girl.
Sure.
But for me, I think not only do you have to have this amazing character, but they have to have a struggle. They have to have something that they're getting past, something that they want to say. And very often in life and in fiction, which is what I write, a struggle can end in two ways. It can end with someone not winning, someone giving up, or it can end with someone overcoming, even if their friends or their family or their community don't stand up for them. And obviously in a lot of dystopian right now, you're going to see those kind of themes, one person against the government, but mine tend to run a little bit lower. And I try to take an everyday person that you might know and to flesh them into a character in a book that you can relate to. Sometimes I throw in some great luxury themes and some fun stuff, because everybody likes to get away. So, but for me, it's always about the struggle, and it's always about sort of who you are at the end of the struggle and how you grew and how you dealt with the struggle. Sometimes people in my books do things that I can't even believe people would do, but in real life, people actually do these things. And then other times in the story, I create a storyline or an ending that I would like to see, that I don't see as often as as maybe people would hope to see. So I give inspiration and empowerment through the struggle, because I think that people can relate to that. I think they can relate deeply to that.
Yeah, I like the fact that you use social narrative for, as a part of your building blocks, yeah, in your story. When you what is it out there in society that I know that equality is important to you. I know that some of the other social issues, are important to you. But when you're looking out there and you see what's going on in society, do you want to respond to that with your writing, or do you just start writing and incorporate that into your writing?
What's kind of strange, and I've noticed this, is that a lot of my writing comes to me in my dreams, or I see something interesting on the news, or I see someone interacting in a way that I really want to give a dialogue to, but I know that they're not necessarily open to it. And so that becomes sort of the seed of the struggle I want to write about. So what I do is I grab a hold of that question, or I grab a hold of that issue, whatever that may be, unfairness, bullying, racism, I mean, we could go on and on about all of the things in the world that are unfair and have always pretty much been unfair. But what I do is I find that one sort of emotional quotient and I hand it to the character and say, what are you going to do with it? And sometimes the character, sometimes I'm not really proud of what they're doing. And then other times the character will surprise you and just be this amazing hero. So I like to turn things on their heads. Sometimes in the world we live in, I think people like to say that person is bad. That person is good. And what I have found is that human beings are both bad and good. Anybody that I know has made bad choices, made good choices. So I think the struggle in between the good and the bad is always a very interesting thing. And to turn a person or a character on their head that you would automatically on the street say, oh, that person must be a terrible person. But to actually flesh them out and have them care about their family, or to recycle, or whatever it is I want to talk about, I give my characters those particular sort of aspects to give them that human quality that will connect to people. And sometimes I don't even know where it comes from. It just happens.
Yeah, I think two very powerful elements of that, that drives a lot of our society today is lack of understanding and lack of compassion.
Right.
But I think when we increase understanding and we increase compassion, I think we are moving in the right direction.
Oh, yeah.
We're all human beings and we're all imperfect, and we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and but we're all moving by something. There's not just things that happen, but without some motivation, some why. I like to call it the why. And
Yeah,
even in my own life, it was determining my why that changed my life. And it really happened through the writing of my own memoir. And what I set out to do originally is not what I ended up doing. And the memoir that I wrote was not at all the way I originally envisioned it. And I have a parallel story in my memoir of my grandson. And so it runs along like that. But there were all of these questions that formed during the writing of my book. And so it wasn't only the answers that I found.
Right.
It was the questions that formed that I never could quite form. I couldn't quite get, the real question. And so I had a hard time coming up with certain answers throughout my life because the question was off. And then when the question formed and I understood it, the answer was a little bit easier to see and grab a hold of. So I'm not a big fiction reader. I didn't even start reading. I couldn't say I was a great reader or an avid reader until probably late in my 20s. Oh. And I discovered Louis L'Amour. If I could have been born at any other time period in my life, I would have been the cowboy who rode over the range and saw the valley for the first time and settled the land. That's who I would have been. And what I discovered about him, though, is that he had fictional stories, but if he talked about going to the boulder that's 10 paces off the highway to the west and 3 paces back to to the north, that boulder was really there.
Right.
And he built the story, around that. But I started reading, and I didn't stop reading. I mean, literally every week. I did not stop reading until I read every book that Louis L'Amour ever wrote.
I hear that. I've read all of them as well.
Yeah.
I love
So
them.
I fell in love with that. But still, my background and being who I was, I went down this path of nonfiction. And so I looked for stuff that was real, inspiring, empowering, and developing, and all of that. But I know that you're a big fan of fiction. Um, and why should we read fiction?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I've been an avid reader since I learned to read. So I think I learned to read when I was about 3 or 4. And the house I grew up in we didn't have television. My mother was very anti-television. And so we watched Mutual of Omaha and Walt Disney, but that's about it. But we had an enormous library. For some reason or another, I gravitated to the library and I read everything in this library, including the really weird stuff like how to make steps for growing rice and just the most bizarre text. But it was the 60s and the 70s, so you can imagine. But I think what all of that taught me, and I read the Encyclopedia Britannica as well, which is really weird. But what reading fiction has really done for me versus reading historical or factual memoir, that sort of thing, what it's really done for me is it's opened up pathways in my mind. If you could see them, which I don't think you have a brain scan on that side, but if you could see the pathways, there are pathways that include history and include people's individual stories as memoir or creative nonfiction. But fiction for me is where it's at, because what it is it's anything you want, whenever you want. It can be another world. It can be another time. It can be anything that you want. So if you decide that you yourself want to be a race car driver in 1920 Italy, and you want your name to be Enrico, Shazam, you are. And it's amazing because it's literally like having your own genie. You can go anywhere in time. You can go anywhere that nobody's ever even been. It's the greatest adventure of all, at least with your eyes open, that I know of. So fiction to me is for people who want to imagine, people who want to see maybe something that isn't here, that should be here, or they wish were here. But fiction writing to me really just amplifies imagination, amplifies creativity, and it also creates empathy for other people. If you read a story, we'll say, my next story I have to read for class is about 3 children in Africa. And I haven't been to Africa yet, but I'm looking forward to going. But 3 children in Africa who wander away from their village because they're tracking an elephant. And they track this elephant and they accidentally get on the wrong side of a revolution. And when they get on the wrong side of this revolution, they're turned into child soldiers by these people. They're forced into this. And the story is about their struggle to get away from this situation and get back to their village. I mean, gosh, when I was a kid, if I saw an elephant, I would track it. I could have ended up over there myself. But and this is a fictional story. But in the fictional story, what it's really telling is the social issues going on in many places around the world that maybe don't get the attention I wish they got from the news media, because people don't want to hear about it for whatever reason, or they don't feel like it's going to, drive viewership. But I really think it's important for people to remember that fiction, yes, is not true, but fiction also has a super secret envelope underneath the story. And very often writers, when I really talk to them for real, fiction writers, have something they want to say in this story. So there's a thread of an emotion or a thread of some sort of social narrative. There's something in there that they want to talk about. And in a more commercialized text, maybe not. But in a very genre specific, I would definitely say that's true.
You think we're tending, from a fictional writing standpoint, do you think we are escaping from reality, or escaping into reality, or to what we to this alternate reality that we would like to see happen? What do you think drives that?
Well, I think that the people are born with imaginations. I think people are born with maybe hopes and dreams that are unfulfilled, whatever those hopes and dreams might be. I mean, that's tragic, really. You know, I was raised with the idea that I could do anything I wanted. And because of the fact that I can't run a 6 minute mile anymore, I probably will never be a running champion or go to the Olympics. But, you know, at some point in my life, perhaps I could have. And I think fiction offers that avenue for people. We'll say you're someone who grows up in a very impoverished place, and your favorite story of all is, we'll say, Richie Rich comics. You know, the kid who's got everything in a helicopter in the backyard. Hey, that sounds pretty good. And maybe, just maybe, the bit of hope or entertainment or escapism that's going on there assist that person in being stronger in their daily life to get through whatever it is that's difficult for them. So it's a lever.
Yeah, I do think that we connect with each other through our stories.
Oh yeah.
And I definitely, I have read fiction stories that they seemed so real.
Right.
The writing was done well. But and you always wonder to what extent the writers actually talking about themselves, or their reality, or are they just masking the story of their own life so that they could tell it without all of the strings that would be attached to divulging that kind of personal stuff about yourself. Can it make us better people?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the second that you understand somebody who's not like you, whatever that means, whatever it is you're like, take yourself, flip it 180 degrees. The second that you can understand someone else's struggle or someone else's life or someone else's culture, if the writer managed to accomplish that in a story, they've done something amazing. Because one person can change many things if it's the right person. I mean, I think sorry, I'm like tearing up. I think yeah, you're not supposed to cry on TV, right? Um, I think I think fiction. I mean, fiction and memoir can do the same thing. It sort of achieves it in a different way. I mean, there's a bravery to memoir that doesn't exist in fiction. In fiction, you're right. Everybody puts on a Halloween costume and we go to the party. Whereas in memoir, you're naked. You're there, and you're saying, this is my truth, however I see it. So there's a different kind of mindset to the writer who writes these things, and also the reader who reads these things. I think fiction, if you're connecting to it on the level of memoir, maybe you're not looking at fiction in the right way. Maybe you should be looking at fiction as it should be dramatic and entertaining, but it should also help you just sort of look at someone that you don't know and wonder, maybe this is what they're really thinking, or this is, and you can't do that in memoir because memoir is so specific. You said this, he said this, she said it. So there isn't that question mark of who it really is that we're talking about. So I think fiction has a wider range to reach people because it sort of takes away that very specific pointing at this one person and scopes it out to, maybe they're talking about me or you or everyone, or I'm not quite sure. And the fact that it puts you off a little bit from your balance or what you know creates the ability for maybe the message to come through because you're not fighting it. or you don't say that's not me, or I don't know that person, why should I care? So I think people put these things in front of themselves, unfortunately, and as we get older, I think it happens more often, which is one of the reasons as we get older, because I am getting older myself, that it's more difficult for people to change and accept technology or new things in society or make new friends, all kinds of things. So I mean, fiction to me is like where it's at, because you can literally you can jump in a rocket and get the heck out of here, and I think that's just the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, I have lots of author friends, who write fiction, and when I'm sitting with them, I oftentimes feel like an alien because that's just not who I am. I'm like, man, you're the, and I love to be around them. I love the energy. I love the interaction, and I always learn something from them. I have taken my hand at writing a little bit of a short story or a fictional storyline. It's just not me. That every time I sit down to write, it's just always about inspiration and empowerment, and it's just so natural for me that it flows that way. And so I just go with it. I appreciate the writing of other people, and I'm so driven toward my particular thinking. But I love the expansion and the exposure. To be around creative minds and storytellers, and I'm a real lover of people. So I mean I connect pretty easily with people, and so I just let that go, and appreciate that, and enjoy it. But um, in Moon's Inc. and Carolina Spirit, which I've not read all of them, but I've read up on them and I looked as much of it as I can. But you definitely talk about experiencing trauma,
Right.
difficulties, and coming out with power. And these things are right up my alley, because I love the story of. I love it when I find somebody who just rewrites the narrative, and they've discovered in their own lives the difference between a fact and a truth. And these things happen to them, that's fact.
Right.
But oftentimes the stories that we write about the events in our lives are not the truth. They're what was, what we interpreted by somebody hurting us, violating us,
Right.
doing us wrong in some level, like we deserve that we had it coming, or we're defective, or we're not lovable, or you go down that whole list of stuff.
Oh yeah.
But when people really decide to take their lives back and empower them, recognize the power that they have, and they rewrite that narrative, that it was their dysfunction, not mine. It
Right.
was what they did that reflected what was going inside. It had nothing to do with me. I'm going to rewrite that story. I am worthy. I am lovable. I do deserve a rich, rewarding, and abundant life.
Right.
So, I mean, I love that when that happens. So in your writing, though, you get us there, from the stories that you're drawing out. So there has to be these elements of reality in the writing as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's my particular style. I think that there are a lot of fiction writers that either tell their own story and just sort of, put. I'm going to give you a Southern term. They put lipstick on a pig.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that term. But sometimes people do that, and I've seen that even in some of the greats that I keep seeing their autobiography, underneath the story. But Mine actually really aren't life experience. What mine are is maybe a reflection of something that happened that really didn't go very well and could have been rewritten. So I rewrite that part of it. But once in a while, I'll find something from a news article or something like that, and I'll develop it, but it becomes its own kind of animal. It sort of goes off-roading, as I call it. But it's
Yeah,
always
great
really, really
phrase.
important for me to talk about things that I see out in the world that people are struggling with. I mean, my next story is about a woman who's single and she's online dating, and the struggle of millennials in a world where they're on display, and it's difficult to find connections and real love. So it's masked in all of these other sort of genre layers, but underneath it all it's just a young person who's trying to find love, and because of the digital virtual age that we live in, it's difficult to make connections to people. And I'm sure that, I don't know if you have any millennials in your life, but it's a struggle for people that age to really find that.
Yeah, we're more connected with the world at large, but we're also at the same time lacking intimacy.
Exactly.
We're lacking these true relationships and
Right.
connections. And everything's so artificial. And,
Exactly.
all of these likes that we get on social media and, all of that doesn't necessarily translate into a single solitary true bona fide friendship,
Or a conversation even. It's just,
even
I liked
conversation.
1,000 things today. Woohoo! Time for dinner. Yeah, I know. I'm
Yeah.
so
And
yeah.
so I think we are dealing with that. So from that standpoint, it's hard to just because not all fiction is the same, just like not all nonfiction is the same. But
Right.
for those fiction stories that are driven with uplifting and empowering, um, and encouraging and like creating hope, I would think that reading more of that would be a good thing for society.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are lists all over the place, of beloved texts where you have a character like Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye. Holden, what a mess Holden was. But I love Holden and his crazy hunting cat because I could relate to him when I first read that story. So I think even though it isn't real, perhaps what it does is give people the strength to maybe break out of whatever it is that isn't giving them the connection in their everyday life to sort of embody the power of that character or the adventurous spirit or whatever it is, that they're doing that's positive, and to take it, sort of out of the story. It's almost impossible, especially as a young reader, in my opinion, to separate yourself from the story. And the reason it is because if a story is written well, it's going to have those emotions and those longings maybe you haven't shared with anyone inside that story. And so this person or this character is talking to you. They understand you. And you can carry it around and you can look at it again and they'll say the same cool sentence to you and you're like, yes. And in the real world, our world, this virtual strangeness we all live in, um, sometimes, you know, people will like something when you say, I'm having a rotten day. Why did you just like that? I mean, are you happy I had a bad day? I mean, that's like really weird to me. So if you said that to a person standing in front of them, they'd be like, oh my gosh, hopefully, and
Yeah.
give you a hug or take you out for a Coke or whatever. But um, but I think that disconnect is really tough. But when there's a book that you find that really connects to how you're feeling, I think it becomes very important, and it should, because it may promote change or connectivity that people didn't have before.
Yeah, I find I don't really struggle for ideas. I have so many things bouncing around inside me all the time. What I do find difficult is the time to develop those, to be able to, close off so that I can just be with that, and I think a lot of people are in that. But how do you, um, and I know you've made lots of comments about your love of nature and connecting, with nature. But what do you have any routines? How do you stay in the groove? What keeps you inspired and moving?
Well, the one treat that I give myself is when I'm feeling really, really stressed out, which I feel stressed out often because I'm juggling, a very rich personal life, a rich career, and I'm a student again too. So I'm always really busy. But I think what really gives me my balance is I start my morning with an affirmation, positive. I don't stand in front of the mirror and say you're such a babe, because you know what, that'd just be like, I've heard of a celebrity who does that, but I just, instead I'm happily married. And I wasn't happily married years ago, but I am now. And so I always make sure that I give a positive affirmation, us. Sometimes it's just as simple as a coffee. Sometimes it's even just a text message because he's traveling or I'm traveling. But that's the first thing I do. That is absolutely the first thing I do. And then after that, I give myself 15 minutes of quiet. No social media, no deep conversations. And if I want to do yoga or take a walk or lay face down in the grass and bow my head off, whatever it is I'm needing that day, I allow myself to have it. And what that really does is it sort of sets you up for the next 24 hours to maybe be a little braver, maybe be a little less negative, and maybe a little bulletproof too. Like when people come at you that surprise you, that you thought were people standing beside you, but it turns out that they weren't. Maybe it makes you a little more able to not say something, take a deep breath, and keep plowing through. But I give myself a mental list, and I expect myself to fulfill it. And if I don't, then the next day I have to speed it up and get it done. It's a promise to myself. I mean, anybody who says they want to be a writer and they're not writing, they don't want to be a writer. What they want to be is somebody who says they're a writer. So if you want to be a writer, find some paper, write. And if it's terrible, that's okay. Keep writing, because eventually it won't be terrible. It'll be pretty awesome. So, that's really, it's about routine, discipline.
And on a personal note, and I try never to get too personal with anybody, but I think a little bit of insight is always, helpful to us especially when we're talking about trying to connect, on a real level.
Right.
I discovered some time back that the things that upset me and the things that I get excited about have something to do with my destiny, and not in a totality, but as a ingredient, as a part of contributing to my overall mission in life. And so when I see things that really upset me, or I see things that I get really excited about, I know those are things that pull on me, that I have a connection to. And there's plenty that upsets me right now. I don't like where we're at. I don't like where we're at as a people. I don't like where we are as a country. I don't like all the stuff that's going on in our world. And it's not that you can just go out there and immediately fix it. We've all got opinions and ideas, but I've never been a fan of the complainers. The
Yeah.
complainers, people who are committed to complaining and never have a solution, they just don't rate very high on my, on my scale there. I like people who can drive solutions. But I'm just wondering, um, you're a writer and you're a fiction writer, and so you can draw on reality and you can draw on social narrative and you can create these storylines. But when it just from a human standpoint, when you look out there and say, what excites you, what upsets you, and what excites you?
Well, let's talk about upset first, and we'll end it with positive. I guess what upsets me the most is that there are people that walk around and say they want to change things or do things, but they're not taking action. And it's all well and good to say, "Oh, that's terrible, that's awful," and to feel an emotional connection. That's wonderful. I'm glad people can still feel, but if you really want to make a difference, you have to do something. You can't just say, "I want to do something," or "I wish I could do." You have to do something. So I think it's really, really important for anybody who has that sort of commitment or has that emotional connection to the negative things that are going on. Go change them. Do something about it. Teach your kids. Talk to every single person you meet. If they disagree with you, that's okay. Disagreements are great, because if you get the right people in the conversation, the change could happen. If people shut down and they're not willing to listen to other people because they disagree, there's nowhere to go. There's just nowhere to go with that. So I think, if you want to be the change, if you really want things to change, you have to do something. You have to. So as far as the things that I like, what I like is that there seems to be a sort of a larger and larger group of people who are seeing that they really don't like how things are going. And they're not quite in that action mode. I think they're looking at everybody else. Is it okay if I get in action mode? But I think we're really close to action mode. And 10 years ago, I would not have said that. So I'm feeling like that there's a rumbling in the happy volcano, the good, positive volcano. And so, I hope in my lifetime that I see it. But I really feel like what you're doing, talking about real situations in your life, what I'm doing, talking about a young girl getting past the death of her father, and talking about how she gets past loss and neglect because her mother's in a deep depression. Things like that help people. People need help. I mean, they need a lot of help. And I honestly think that they're not asking the right questions, like you were saying. And you can't get anywhere unless you ask the right question. Because if you don't ask the right question, you don't know. Am I going left? Am I going right? Which highway am I taking? So I'm glad to see that mindset seems to be sort of, I can hear the rumble. And I couldn't hear it before. I was like, walking by myself saying, am I an alien? Am I the only person who feels this way? So I'm starting to sort of see that coming up. And it's really great.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know for many people that they really are discouraged at the moment, and but I'm more upbeat than I think I've been in a number of years. So I mean, I really parallel your expression here, that it's this feeling that we're not on the verge of destruction here. We're gonna wake up. To me, I like to call it an awareness. We're waking up from this somehow stupor that we've been in, and there's so much corruption, and there's so much abuse of power, and there's so much in the negative realm. But we forget that we actually have the power to do something about all these things. Right. And it's like you say, it's one thing to think about it, it's one thing to have an idea, and say, oh, but to expect everybody else to do it without any personal responsibility, I think that's what's changing. I think people are realizing this isn't going to change unless I do. And
Right.
so I think it's going to, I think it's going to bring us all together. Nobody's ever going to agree 100%.
No.
But, you know, we need to get our dialogue back, because all it is right now is monologue. We're just screaming at each other and nobody's hearing one another. And, you know, we need to be able to bring civility back to the public square and actually look each other in the eye and talk to each other.
And agree to disagree too.
Yeah, you can, without all of this, you know.
Yeah, all of it's just noise. It's
Yeah, noise.
tons and tons and tons of noise, and it's not even it's not even heavy noise. It's just fluffy noise.
Yeah, it's just noise.
Yeah, it's just boom, boom, boom.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for being with us. You know, it's been a great conversation. I'm glad we had this time together. I do want people to know how to connect with you. And so it's www.bibianakrall.com,
Mm-hmm.
and they can connect with you that way. Any parting words for us here as we wrap things up?
I would say, you know, it's such a tough day to do this because of, you know, everything that happened yesterday. I would just say to people, don't give up. Take action. Do something. Stop saying you're going to do something and do something. So
Together we can make a difference.
we can.
Yeah.
Try.
Well, thanks again for being with us. This is Rick Amitin. Thanks for joining the conversation at Rick on Life. I'd love to hear from you. Any suggestions, comments, ideas, things that you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. You can reach me at rickonlife@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing whatever you have to say. And remember, no matter what's going on in your life, just sprinkle a little love on it. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.